Moment number 6. Canadian trucker protests use Bitcoin to fight financial blockade. In Canada, a massive convoy of trucks, estimated in number between 35,000 to 50,000, stretched over 70 kilometers, took to the streets to protest against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's COVID-19 vaccine mandates. They became known as the Freedom Convoy. This Freedom Convoy honked incessantly, expressing widespread discontent among supply chain workers about vaccine mandates and border restrictions that impacted trade. The convoy, driven by both medical concerns and perceived infringements on rights, attracted significant attention and support, raising over 10 million Canadian dollars on GoFundMe before the platform halted donations due to political pressure. This spotlighted the potential for decentralized platforms like Bitcoin to play a role in such movements. Leaders like Benjamin Ditcher and Tamara Lich highlighted that despite media portrayals, most truckers were vaccinated and their protest was peaceful. They aimed to maintain a narrative of truth, peace, and love, advocating for the restoration of rights as per the Canadian Charter. The protest also served as a platform for Bitcoin advocates to educate and collaborate, reinforcing the unity among various groups standing for freedom. Public figures, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Jordan Peterson, and Jimmy Dore, noted the convoy's use of Bitcoin as pivotal in showcasing the relevance of this technology. The Freedom Convoy symbolized a significant grassroots movement, emphasizing the power of unified action and financial autonomy against government overreach during crises.
There you have it, moment number 6 of the top 21 moments of the last Bitcoin epoch. The Canadian truckers giving a quick plug to the new Bitcoin magazine on newsstands now. The halving issue. Go and subscribe for your chance to win a special edition ledger, halving edition, Bitcoin halving edition. And of course, underscoring the Canadian truckers is this narrative of self-custody, needing to move Bitcoin outside the state in ways that undermine attempted crackdowns. Matt, I want to go over to you. The Canadian truckers, maybe not the shining success that we wanted it to be, but in many ways a pivotal lesson for where Bitcoin needs to head. Your take?
Bitcoin is not for the transactions you can make anyway. Bitcoin is for the transactions you can't make without permission. And this was our moment. And for me, this one really hurt because I feel we failed. I feel we failed people who actually needed Bitcoin, and we just weren't there, and the education wasn't there, the tools weren't there, and we can do better. And it should be a lesson to all of us, Bitcoiners around the world, that we need to do better and we must do better.
Was this a failure, in your words, of technology, of the people assembled? Can Bitcoin still be a tool for protest that routes around government actors? Shinobi, your learning lessons.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two biggest failures in how this was executed was just the complete lack of using any type of privacy tool. Like, you actually have to proactively, in the way that you structure your transactions, interact with the network, take steps to obscure the transactional history and the connections between things. And the people involved in raising this money and trying to get it to the truckers didn't really follow through with that. They didn't take the necessary steps to add that layer of protection. And another aspect of it is just the global nature of Bitcoin. Anybody, anywhere can hold a key to a wallet, but all of the key holders who were involved with this were Canadian citizens who could be subjected to the Canadian legislative process, the law enforcement, and that's ultimately what wound up happening that led to these funds being seized and handed over to the police department. You could have had people anywhere in the world completely free from any type of jurisdictional exposure to the Canadian government involved in that process, and they could have essentially just said pound sand. if the Canadian government tried to get your keys or stop them from actually facilitating any of this. But nobody involved really took the steps to take advantage of those properties of Bitcoin that would have let this actually be successful in helping the truckers fund themselves to continue the protest.
So it sounds like you're saying this could have been a success. Obviously, case studies will be written about the Canadian truckers and what they went through. Nico, your thoughts on how we move forward, what's being done post the Canadian truckers to send the message that Bitcoin can be there in times of need?
Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian take to Odell and Shinobi. I think it was, you can't call it a success, but you can't call it a total failure either. From my recollection, I believe that most of the Bitcoin, or a good portion of the Bitcoin, was not seized, right? The authorities were not able to recover it. And that's in stark contrast towards all the other traditional financial system, whether it was GoFundMe or anything, they were able to freeze that, right? I love Nunchuck's response to them, to the Canadian government, where the Canadian government basically asked, like, hey, you know, could you provide information on your clients, or could you provide the keys? And Nunchuck's like, look, sorry, I can't help you, and when you guys run out of money, we'll be able to help you, we'll be able to serve you guys as well. I think it's a great learning experience. I think that there was a multitude of lessons learned. A good friend of mine is BTC Sessions, and I call him a freedom fighter, and I never forget, I did a show with him his first show when he came back after everything that happened. I remember the look on his face, and I looked at him and I said, dude, you're a freedom fighter. And history will look at this moment like positively. And I think that there's a lot of things that happened that made us learn a lot of things that we can apply it to the next time. So I wouldn't call it a total failure. I would definitely call it a partial failure. And I think that we learned a lot of things along the way.
Of course, counting on the top moments of the last epoch, eagerly awaiting the halving block, 6 blocks away, getting into the big stories that defined the epoch, the Canadian truckers. Nico, you were talking about next time, this idea that there might be a government that overreaches. Certainly it feels that way. The current political environment is stressful. Matt, Shinobi, I want to throw it over to you.
I mean, I think, look, I think what Nico said is really important, is that the fiat system completely failed these people, right? Like Trudeau and his cronies in Canada were just straight up closing bank accounts. They were disconnecting people from the traditional financial system. They were freezing Patreon donations. They were doing the whole 9 yards. And they were also very aggressive to the Bitcoin donation campaign once it started to hit a critical mass. And there's 2 things here that I think are important to note. First of all, I think Trudeau did pull off the gas a little bit. I think he's a fucking asshole. I think he's a corrupt politician. I think we did get a little bit lucky that he didn't go the full 10 yards.
Well, in this case, the Supreme Court even overturning and saying that he overreached. So you had the high courts.
And we also didn't see the U.S. government step in, because there was a lot of U.S. affiliated individuals and entities that were involved in the process, and it never crossed the border. And it could have. We were close. There was moments there, and you can go back. And all of this is archived, all of this is out there for history. You can go back. There were moments there where it looked like the US government was going to get involved as well and was going to start doing some draconian ass shit. And they do draconian ass shit all the time, don't get me wrong. But like, it looked like specifically they were going to start freezing bank accounts and going after financials of people that were known involved with this. The second thing is, you can't have freedom without privacy. Privacy is a key aspect of this whole mission, this whole movement. And I think a lot of people miss that point. And then I will just add one more point, which is that I think there's been less of a focus in Bitcoin on individuals, empowering the single use case of individuals receiving donations. And I think we've made a lot of progress over the last 3 to 6 months. I think Nostr is a key aspect of this progress. I think you avoid a lot of these problems, and instead of having one entity, you know, in this case it was like a 3 of 5 multi-sig. It was like 5 people that controlled all the donations and then had to distribute them out. If it was individual truckers receiving the donations, and a lot of these truckers were already posting to social media. If they were posting to a censorship-resistant social media protocol like Nostr, and they were receiving donations directly, all of a sudden, instead of having 3 people's doors to knock on, you have 150 people's doors to knock on, 250 people's doors to knock on. And all of a sudden, the individual impacts of lack of privacy or OPSEC failures and whatnot become lessened and it becomes more of a burden on whatever draconian government there is. But there will be more censorship. There will be more use of financial tools to censor people and control people. And if you don't believe that, like, you're just going to live through it. You're going to live through it. You're going to see it. And Bitcoin is here as a option.
Do you mind if I add?
You can respond. Yes, sure.
Yeah. So, the last part that Odell was saying is 100% true. 90% of the world's nations right now are currently developing. They've released a pilot version, some type of iteration of a central bank digital currency. So the lines might be a little bit obfuscated right now, but we're definitely heading into a future where it's literally Bitcoin or slavery, and you have to decide where you want to live. Do you want your future? Do you want your children to have a future of slavery? Do you want your children to have a future of freedom? And I don't think there will be an in-between. And the reason for that is simple. I think governments are always going to want to censor and debase the currency. And if people have, and I'm going to use one of Odell's sayings that he said earlier, if people have an escape valve, they're going to use it. They're going to use the other money. And I think governments are going to have a fundamental problem with the fact that, imagine if that protest happened and they didn't have the switch to just start just start shutting down people's accounts. I think they would freak out.
So what is money and how does it get value? Paper money has value because someone says so. Bitcoin is different. It's like digital gold. It has value for many of the reasons gold does, but that's only the start. It has a limited supply, only 21 million, so no one can decide to just print more. Because no central authority controls it, it can never be shut down. And unlike with banks and credit card companies, you don't need approval to use it. It puts the power back in all our hands. Bitcoin lets you control your finances. Kraken lets you buy Bitcoin. Kraken, see what crypto can be.
It's not a store of value. It's not a medium of exchange.
Bitcoin is a pure Ponzi. It's a pyramid.
If I was the government, I'd close it down.
The asset itself is creating nothing.
If it's not backed up by anything,
There's no intrinsic value to this asset.
You want Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin's topping out, by the way. So I'm going to say enough is enough and ka-ching is ka-ching.
it is a craze, and all crazes come to an end. It's going to cost El Salvador a lot of money. People are going to lose money. The government's going to lose money. It's going to just be a disaster.
My personal advice is don't get involved. Bitcoin itself is a hyped up fraud.
It was always a hot dumpster fire.
It's a lousy investment.
What's Bitcoin at? 16,000? It has another 17,000 to go down.
But I would not touch crypto in a million years. And I think people have to start recognizing that it's here to stay. This is a remarkable comeback that was unexpected.
People don't forget.
You just heard some of the worst takes of the last epoch from folks like Jim Cramer, Jamie Dimon on Wall Street. We're counting down the moments that defined the last epoch were still to come. A special interview with Dave Portnoy, CEO of Barstool Sports. We'll also hear from Dave Ripley, CEO of Kraken, of course, sponsoring the stream. Want to turn it over to the floor. We were talking about the Canadian truckers. Obviously, this moment, a huge one, lots to go in. Not just a technology problem, right? You also have to teach people to want these tools, whether it's Bitcoin or Nostr. A point that I'll throw out is that if you look at studies and surveys, the Canadian trucker is still overwhelmingly unpopular in Canada. How do you deal with the problem of people just not valuing privacy tools, not valuing the sovereignty that Bitcoin brings? Nico, Odell, Shinobi?
I mean, it's just a tough situation to be in. You in that reality just have to accept the fact that it is a minority thing, and people in that society or that area who actually do value those things are going to be in a very adversarial environment, and it's going to be much harder. Like the bar that they're going to have to meet in order to actually get something of value or succeed in how they want to use that, it's just going to be more difficult.
Well, we've got up on the big board here Elizabeth Warren, obviously raising her anti-crypto army, looking to enact things in Congress that could restrict the rights of Bitcoin users. Let's turn to the environment in Washington. Are we optimistic? To the floor.
Is Peter Schiff feeding her a gold coin?
He might be. He might be throwing it and trying to bounce it off Jim
I think
Cramer's
Elizabeth
head.
Warren is a corrupt politician, and unfortunately, we live in a world in America where bribery is completely legal, and the largest corporations are able to just bankroll candidates who are career politicians. And in Elizabeth Warren's case, that happens to be banks. And the huge irony of the whole thing is she pretends she's like the anti-bank freedom candidate, and people should just stop being dumbasses. Like that is the reality of the situation, and politicians will not save us. We have to save ourselves, and that's where Freedom Tech comes in. Free and open source software is not in control by any single individual. It outlives all of us. We could die. It's viral in nature. Someone else can pick it up. Anyone can run it. Anyone can self-host it. That's true freedom. That's true actionable change. That's how we push the ball forward. You don't push the ball forward by voting for your favorite candidate.
Well, a lot at stake in the 2024 election. Maybe you're not confident that things will change, but obviously Bitcoiners looking to get active and involved. If there is a continuation of the current administration, a continuation of the current policies, is there a concern about what might happen, Nico, Shinobi?
I mean, politicians in DC are going to do one of two things. They're either going to outright attack and try to stifle or potentially even outlaw everything in this ecosystem, or they're going to try to regulate it and pervert it in a way to neuter the benefits that it can have for your everyday American citizen, but just twist it to benefit their agenda, their economic policy. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think it's just things are going to have to get worse. Like, people learn and start caring about things like freedom, things like preserving their wealth, when things get so bad that they have to. Like, if you look at levels of adoption of Bitcoin around the world, it's always the places that are worst off where adoption has the deepest penetration, where the monetary policy is the most out of control, where capital controls are the most draconian. That is where Bitcoin is really thriving and clicking with people. And I think the harsh reality is that most people aren't going to care or be interested in Bitcoin except for just the number go up until things really get bad enough for them that they have no choice other than to care about these things.
Well, first they laugh at you, then they fight you. It seems like in many ways the next epoch may bring a higher level of stakes. Are there concerns that we haven't addressed that you're looking forward to? I mean, it could be a continuation of the current regime. It could be a worsening of the current regime. What does that worsening look like, Nico?
I think that politicians, governments get a tremendous amount of power by being able to have the privilege of being able to create money for free that everyone else has to work for. I think they're going to fight tooth and nail in order to retain that power. That's how the US government is able to deficit spend $1 trillion a year. That's how they're able to fund the endless wars. That's how, people like Elizabeth Warren, who's right behind us, that's how they end up with these crazy net worths off a government salary. So I think no one's better than their incentives, and I think that they're really going to fight to protect that. I don't think we're there yet in history. I think we're getting into the first innings of that. But I really believe the internet did two things. It disintermediated information, and it's now disintermediating money. We're seeing how hard they're fighting back the disintermediation of information. Tucker did an incredible interview with Mike Benz, and they were talking about how the national security apparatus was freaking out because people were able to have peer-to-peer communications on a mass scale, and it makes it very difficult for governments to control communications the way that they used to. Now, the disintermediation of money is just beginning, and the way that things are currently run, it's on the line, right? Like, that is their source of funding. That's how they, print. That's how they are able to pay for these things that they can't afford via direct taxation. They're able to print the difference. So I really believe that we're going to come into this inflection point the next 5 to 10 years. But to add to Odell and what Shinobi are saying, look, use freedom tools, take self-custody of your Bitcoin. If enough people take self-custody, we win, and there's nothing they can do about it.
I think there's an important piece to add there, which is at its core, humans have one key move of change that they can do, which is actually physically moving their jurisdiction, and it's jurisdictional arbitrage. And what we're starting to see is that different localities, different jurisdictions are addressing this in different ways. And they're addressing this increased freedom of individuals. They can either adopt that, they can embrace that, or they can move against it. And in America specifically, we have very good freedom of movement. You can move between states. We have very good states' rights. We're seeing states like Texas. We're seeing states like Tennessee. We're seeing states like Florida, Wyoming, starting to move towards individual freedoms. And the reason they are doing that is because of the incentives that Nico is talking about, is because they see an advantage for their localities. And it goes back to our conversation about El Salvador, which is this idea that it starts at the grassroots level. So I would say to people that are listening right now, there are things you can do where you're currently living, yes. But also, you should honestly start thinking, like, how are things playing out in the next decade? How are things playing out in the next 2 decades? Did you just have kids? Do you have grandkids on the way? Maybe I should be in a different jurisdiction. Maybe I should move towards somewhere that is actually realizing where we're going and has at least some of my best interests at heart. And I think that is the single biggest thing we have going for us in terms of regulatory burden and regulatory attack surface, is this idea that certain jurisdictions realize that they have an opportunity to buck the trend and not go fully totalitarian.
Well, it seems miners out there are getting tired. We're getting tired. We'll be here for a lot longer, it seems, to count down the top moments of the epoch. I want to give a counterpoint to maybe what Nico and Matt Odell were saying here, that there is a lot of excitement for dollarization within the Bitcoin community. We're seeing technical initiatives to put US dollars on things like Lightning. There are nations such as Lebanon where people are buying US dollar stablecoins instead of Bitcoin and saving in those. So I guess, how do you square this idea that the Bitcoin community can make decisions that align with the interests of the US government, and maybe are?
Well, the Bitcoin miners cut me off earlier, and you took a cheap shot on me about Tether. Tether is doing what one would expect Tether to do as a corporation, which is accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible without getting wrecked. But the big issue with Tether is that they are a single point of failure, they are a trusted third party, and they have a massive regulatory attack surface. The US government and other governments do not want to see a black market dollar out there without KYC. And this is exactly why Bitcoin was invented. Bitcoin was invented so that you have no trusted third parties. So I think as things start to unravel, what will happen is people will move to trusted third parties that will protect their interests in the short term. Things like Tether, things like other centrally controlled stablecoins. As those things start to break, as they start to realize this is why Bitcoin exists, then they move to Bitcoin afterwards.
We're getting Shinobi riled up.
So, see, this is exactly what I was talking about earlier, where Washington has the incentive to distort what's going on in this space to their benefit while trying to restrict those benefits or those properties that can actually help the individual with Bitcoin. And like stablecoins like Tether are the perfect example of that. Like stablecoins ride Bitcoin's coattails almost everywhere that Bitcoin penetrates, and they just come with this narrative of, oh, the volatility is solved. Your money won't just crash and turn into half the value overnight. And what this ultimately does is onboard these people into systems. Every blockchain, every system that Tether is issued on, it is surveillable. They can freeze coins. They can seize them back. Like these protocols that stable coins are issued on, they are not free. They are not like Bitcoin. And they ultimately are a huge driver of demand for US treasuries. So they literally ride Bitcoin's coattails everywhere that Bitcoin is adopted. They drive demand for treasuries to keep the dollar propped up. They actually slip in these systems of controls inherent to the legacy financial system as the guise of a blockchain or a token following behind Bitcoin, and they sucker all these peoples into this system. Like they are doing everything they can to pervert what Bitcoin is doing, just back into the trap of the legacy system with a shiny new label and carriage for it.
So you're saying a Bitcoin-backed solution to that problem may be interesting. Nico, your take?
Yeah, so it's interesting in Latin American developing countries, to what you're saying earlier, is you're seeing not so much the adoption of Bitcoin, you're seeing the adoption of Tether, you're seeing the adoption of USDC. That is an educational problem. And specifically speaking from a Latin American's perspective, if you're in Venezuela, a dollar is like the thing that you want to be able to get. So it's not so much that it's an educational thing. People just don't understand that Bitcoin is superior to the dollar. But again, if you live in a country like Venezuela that's going through hyperinflation, and from your perspective, the dollar's like, wow, this thing is stable, this thing is awesome, right? This thing works. So the dollar is just the best of all these horrible, shitty fiat currencies. So again, I think it's a generational thing. I think Mi Primer Bitcoin in El Salvador is doing Satoshi's work in the sense that they're educating the younger generations on Bitcoin, and not only Bitcoin, how to use Bitcoin, and then it's imprinted on them from a very early age that it's, oh, okay, this Bitcoin thing is the real money. This Bitcoin thing is the superior money. So I think it's going to take multiple generations. I think it's going to take a lot of work from Bitcoin educators, Bitcoin content creators. We have to win over the culture. We have to get it into mainstream consciousness that, hey guys, it doesn't matter whether you vote left or whether you vote right, regardless of the political party, they're just going to print, a ridiculous amount of money. They're not going to solve your problems. You're really going to find hope or an opportunity for the future in Bitcoin. So I think it's an educational issue. And again, it's a big issue to overcome. But the reality is that in most developing countries that are going through hyperinflation or an unstable fiat currency, like what Shinobi was talking about, you're really seeing this adoption of Tether. You're not really seeing this adoption of Bitcoin. But again, it's an educational issue, and I think as Bitcoin's volatility starts to decrease, as we start to get into these huge, large numbers, I really believe all roads lead to Bitcoin eventually.
Well, want to give it a quick cheers to our listeners out there staying with us. We're working overtime here as we await the block for the fourth halving coming up in 6 blocks. Currently talking about, what's the number 6 was the Canadian truckers?
Talking about Tether, stablecoins.
Yes, that evolved into a conversation on Tether and stablecoins. And saved by the bell. There you have it, folks. 5 blocks until the fourth halving. We're going to send it back to the studio for the announcement of the top 5 moments of the last epoch coming up.